The sky burned above the battlefield, casting a red glow on the ash-covered ground. Metal scraps and broken machines they scattered like dead animals. Soldiers from the Alrexian Empire moved carefully through the smoke, their laser rifles ready. They had destroyed everything in this village, just like the last 7. Nothing had survived until now. Something moved behind a fallen tower. The captain, a tall lizard-like warrior named Kor, raised his hand for silence. He signaled 2 scouts to check. They crept forward, expecting only rats or maybe a dying rebel. But then the scream came. It was sharp, furious, and it sliced through. The silence like a blade. Seconds later, one scout flew backward and smashed into a wall. His armor had been torn open like paper. The second scout tried to fire, but his weapon was knocked from his hand. Something fast, small, and brutal burst. From the shadows. It leapt on him, smashed his helmet with a stone, then disappeared again into the smoke. Kor cursed and signaled his whole squad. "Surround the ruins. It's a local monster," he yelled. His soldiers moved with military speed, scanning every corner, aiming at every flicker of movement. But nothing came. Just silence and smoke. Then came the sound of footsteps. Not fast or panicked, calm and heavy. A figure stepped out from behind the rubble. It wore no armor, only torn fabric and bloodied wrappings. Hair matted, face covered, in dust and blood. But the eyes were calm, sharp, and human. Kor froze. He wasn't expecting a human. They had left this region months ago, all captured, all dead. The humans were weak compared to Alrexians, slow, emotional, and fragile. But this one stood tall, unshaken, as if daring them to attack. "Don't shoot," Kor whispered. She might have answers, but one soldier didn't listen. He fired a stun blast directly at her chest. The energy hit her, but she didn't fall. She staggered, then roared like a beast. In one jump, she landed on the shooter, crushed his weapon, and dislocated his jaw with a single punch. Now the squad panicked. Kor shouted for retreat. But she was already moving, jumping from one enemy to another, using pieces of broken metal as blades, her movements too fast to follow. They had brought a full squad, 12 elite Alrexian fighters. Now there were only 4 standing. Blood soaked the stones. The last few soldiers fired wildly, trying to hit the blur she had become. She moved like a shadow, too fast, too smart. She wasn't just surviving. She was winning. Finally, someone managed to hit her leg with a burn round. She fell to one knee. Kor raised his cannon, preparing to fire a killing shot. But she looked up and smiled. That smile froze him. There was no fear in her eyes. Just calculation. She grabbed the nearby body, swung it as a shield, and charged. Kor tried to fire, but she was already too close. A kick sent his weapon flying. A punch broke his arm. She pinned him to the ground and raised a sharpened piece of armor to his throat. He expected death. But instead, she said 2 words. "You." Started. Then she vanished into the smoke again, leaving only broken bodies and fear behind. The Alrexians who survived would later tell their commanders about the monster in the ruins. But when the records were reviewed and the DNA collected, the truth was clear. She wasn't a mutant, a hybrid, or some ancient weapon. She was just a human, and that terrified the council more than any monster could. Because humans were not supposed to survive alone. Not without food, allies, or weapons. Not against trained soldiers with modern tech. And definitely not win, but she had. And somewhere, in the ruins of a dying world, she waited. For the next squad. Asterisk. The Alrexian dropship landed 2 kilometers from the ruins. This time, the soldiers were not regular infantry, they were hunters. Silent, masked warriors trained for extreme survival zones. They carried electric nets, paralyzing foam, and deep scanners. Their orders were not to kill, they were to capture. The human, Commander Vark, stepped out of the ship and touched the burned ground. He studied the footprints, one light, fast-moving figure, surrounded by the deep tracks of panicked retreat. He narrowed his eyes. "She moves like a predator," he said quietly. One scout laughed. "She's just a human." Vark didn't reply. Instead, he pointed to the scorched tower where most of the last squad had died. "Set up drones. We hunt her like we hunt shadow beasts." The team moved in silence. Tiny drones spread into the smoke. Infrared scans showed nothing. Heartbeat detectors picked up only the dying rats and a few birds. But Vark knew she was near. He could feel the stillness, the silence that came before something deadly struck. She watched them from above, hidden inside a hollowed beam. Her leg still burned from the energy wound. She had wrapped it with scavenged bandages, stolen from the first squad's medkits. Every breath hurt, but she didn't stop. Pain was her normal now. She counted the new intruders. 10, all faster, smarter, and better armed than the first group. They spread in a circle like expert trackers. She would not surprise them the same way. But she didn't need surprise anymore. She needed fear. She dropped a broken helmet from above. It hit the ground near the scout who had laughed. The sound made everyone freeze. Vark turned toward the noise, but no figure followed it, only silence again. Then, from another direction, a body rolled out of the smoke, one of the original. Dead soldiers. She had moved it without being seen. The message was clear. She was playing with them, too. Hunters broke formation and advanced into a side alley. One knelt to scan while the other kept watch. Behind them, a shadow shifted. A trap was sprung. The one who scanned didn't see her coming. A brick smashed into his neck. He dropped silently. The other spun around too late. She kicked his knee, grabbed his net gun, and vanished again into the maze of metal and ash. Vark raised his weapon. "She's bleeding. She's slowing down." Tightened the circle. No one moves alone. But the fear had already started. The team began hearing sounds that weren't there. Whispers, falling stones, breathing. One soldier fired at a shadow. Another dropped his scanner, hands shaking. They were trained not to panic. But something about this human felt wrong. She was wounded, hungry, and alone. And still, she made the hunters feel like prey. She struck again, this time from below. A sewer grate flew open and dragged one down. Screams echoed as he vanished into darkness. The others rushed to save him, but only found blood on the tunnel walls. Vark snarled. "Enough. Lock the exits. Burn the tunnels." But just as they sealed the last gate, the power grid failed. Lights shut off. The comms went silent. Darkness swallowed the ruins. Then, her voice came through their earpieces, low and cold. "You brought cages. Who do you think is trapped?" The drones shut down next. One by one, their signals blinked out. The last thing one drone saw was her face, inches from the lens. She had torn it off the wall and looked directly into it with that same calm, deadly stare. Vark realized too late she wasn't just surviving in the ruins. She owned them. He turned toward the dropship and ordered retreat. But the hatch was already open. The pilot was missing. Only a bloody boot remained on the floor. The rest of the crew had vanished. Somewhere in the smoke, she watched them break formation, watched them argue and panic. She didn't smile this time. Her breathing was shallow. Her muscles ached. She wasn't doing this for fun. She was doing it because it had to be done. She was the last human in this sector, and she wasn't going to die without making them remember her. Vark stumbled through the ruins, dragging one of his injured men by the arm. The fog was thick now, too thick. The Alrexians were supposed to control this land, but it felt like the land had turned against them. The stone paths shifted. Their maps made no sense anymore. Every echo sounded like her footsteps. Only 3 of the 10 hunters were still alive. Vark dropped the wounded soldier against a broken wall and scanned the area. His tracker showed nothing. No life, no movement, no sign of the human. But she had to be nearby. She always was. He gritted his teeth. "This is not war," he said. "This is a message." Far beneath the ruined city, she leaned against a wall and forced her breath to slow. Blood soaked her side where a hunter's blade had cut deep. Her hands shook as she poured disinfectant onto the wound. She bit down hard on a piece of cloth. To stay silent, her vision blurred. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her last injection of adrenaline was nearly empty. She was dying, and she knew it, but her eyes still burned with the same fire. She wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. They had burned her city. They had called her species weak. They had taken her brother in the first sweep, then her mother in the second. She was supposed to go next. She didn't, and now they wanted to erase even that refusal. On the surface, the Alrexian command received strange reports. Vark's signals had stopped. Drones sent to scan the ruins simply disappeared. Orbital sensors showed movement, but no heat, no identity. It was as if the ruins were alive. General Threx, a high-ranking war leader, stood on the bridge of a battleship above the Khosef region. "She's still there?" he asked. "Yes, General, one human. Still resisting. Ridiculous. Humans are not built for prolonged resistance. Send in firebombers. Flatten the zone." "But sir," the aide said quietly, "she's not just resisting, she's winning." Threx's fists clenched. This couldn't happen. The Alrexian Empire had conquered 6 sectors in the last 3 months. No single survivor should be holding up a full invasion. It made them look weak. It made others think about hope. Below, in the ruins, Vark finally heard her again. A slow tapping on metal, just 3 sharp taps, then silence. It was a signal. He turned, rifle raised, expecting her face to jump out from the shadows. Instead, he found a trail, bloody footprints leading toward a collapsed corridor. Vark followed them. Slowly, careful not to alert her. The path ended at a chamber that looked like an old shelter. Inside, someone had painted the walls with symbols, human symbols. Names, dates, messages of resistance. It wasn't just her hiding here. It had once been a base for others like her. Vark looked around and saw bones, some old, some new. But in the center, he saw something stranger, a child's drawing of a girl holding hands with a beast. Under it were the words, "She protects us." A whisper came from the dark. "You shouldn't have come alone." Vark turned. She was already behind him. Her eyes were empty, now no more anger, only duty. She moved slower than before, her injury obvious, but her hands were steady. He fired, but she knocked the barrel upward and drove her shoulder into his chest. They crashed to the ground. She pinned him. He tried to reach for his blade, but she snapped it from his grip and pressed it to his throat. "Why do you fight?" He gasped. "Because you don't think I should." Vark stared at her. "You're human, not a monster." She didn't answer. She stood up and walked away into the smoke, leaving him broken but alive. He didn't understand it. She had the chance to kill him, but she chose not to. That confused him more than anything else. Back aboard the Alrexian battleship, General Threx received the last transmission from Vark's team. Only static, then a voice. Her voice. "You think I'm the last one. I'm not." Threx froze. Then the screen went black. The council met in silence. On the central screen floated the ruins of Sector 9 Gamma, now known only as the Dead Zone. The footage was unstable, full of static, sound distortion, and glimpses of broken machines. But one thing was clear. The human was still alive. General Threx stood at the edge of the chamber. "She's not a soldier. She's a virus," he said. "She breaks morale. She kills our best hunters. She turns rubble into traps and fear into weapons." A red-scaled officer stepped forward. "Then why not send in the flamers, burn everything, clean the map? She knows we're watching. She wants us to overreact." She wants us to destroy our own credibility, Threx said. She's baiting us. The council remained silent, but the air grew heavy. None of them wanted to admit it aloud, but it was true. They were afraid of a single human. Down below, in the ruins, she crawled into a cracked storage unit deep beneath a fallen structure. Her side was infected now, and her vision faded in. Out. She pressed a cold gel patch against the wound and grit her teeth. Her fingers trembled. Her hearing buzzed, but she was still alive. That mattered. A small handheld recorder sat in her pocket. It was old, dented, but it still worked. She switched it on and whispered, "Day 43, out of medkits, power cells low." I counted 5 bodies. This morning, one still breathing when I found him. I ended it quickly. She paused, then added, "To whoever finds this, I'm not sorry." She turned it off and closed her eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember. Her little brother's voice, her mother's hands fixing her broken goggles, her father's laugh. That world no longer existed, but in her head, it still played like a song. Footsteps echoed above. She didn't move. She could tell by the rhythm they weren't soldiers. They were heavier, slower. Threx had sent machines.exo-suits. They didn't fear pain. They didn't fear the dark. But she knew their weakness. Machines followed logic. She had already filled 3 lower floors with magnetic traps. The moment they stepped in, the metal floor collapsed and 3 of them fell into the pit. A chain reaction triggered, igniting the fuel tanks buried there weeks ago. The explosion rocked the ruins. From the orbiting ship, Threx watched the shockwave. "Rise. She's rigged the entire zone," someone whispered. "She's bleeding to death," Threx growled. "And still she wins." But she wasn't winning. She leaned against a shattered beam, coughing up blood. Her energy was gone. Every move hurt. But she wouldn't stop until she knew the message had reached the right ears. Not the generals. Not the hunters. The survivors, her people. There had to be others. She found a half-functioning beacon from one of the fallen suits and pulled it apart with shaking hands. Using wires and scrap metal, she connected it to her recorder and spliced in her last message. She climbed to the highest point left in the zone, a broken tower of twisted steel. The climb nearly killed her. Her hands bled. Her breath came in short, painful bursts. But when she reached the top, she planted the beacon and hit send. "Message to any free human out there," her voice crackled across empty space. "I'm still here, and I made them bleed. You don't have to win. You just have to make them remember." Then she sat beside it, eyes staring at the stars above. She knew they would come now. The last wave, the final blow. But for the first time in days, she smiled. Not because she felt safe, but because she knew someone was listening. And far away, across the stars, a group of human refugees received her signal. They had thought she was dead. Now they knew she was still fighting, and they would return. The resistance ship glided through deep space, cloaked and silent. Inside, no one spoke for several seconds. The message from the beacon played again, her voice shaking but proud, echoing across the chamber like a spark inside a cold furnace. "I'm still here, and I made them bleed. You don't have to win. You just have to make them remember." Captain Rayner stared at the recording. He hadn't heard her voice since the fall of Earthbase. Everyone had said she was gone dead in the rubble, crushed by tanks or buried beneath the ruins. But now he knew the truth. She had stayed behind so others could escape. "She's holding the dead zone alone," whispered the navigator. "And she's still alive," Rayner nodded. "Plot a course. We're going back." Another soldier spoke. "Up, there's no way through. That sector's locked under full Alrexian control." "Then we make our own way," Rayner replied. Back on the planet, she lay beneath the remains of the beacon tower, half-conscious, blood-soaked, and barely breathing. The last fight had taken everything she had. Her muscles no longer obeyed. Even her thoughts were scattered, broken into flashes of sound and memory. But something pulled her awake. The air changed. The ground hummed. Then came the thunder of landing ships bigger than before, heavier, and loaded with soldiers. The final strike had come. Threx had sent everything. Dozens of drop pods slammed into the ruined city. Swarms of armored elites spread through the zone. Scanners scanned every inch. Air drones mapped every crack. This time, they wouldn't underestimate her, but they were already too late. The resistance had heard the message, and they were coming. On the edge of the zone, a small ship uncloaked behind the mountains. Raynor's team of 8 human operatives exited with grim faces and heavy weapons. They weren't just fighters. They were all survivors from other lost cities, people who had known what it meant to watch their homes burn. "She bought us time," Raynor said. "Let's not waste it." The humans moved fast and silent through the terrain. The Alrexians had blocked most signals, but Raynor's engineer cracked a gap through the noise. A weak pulse led them deeper into the ruin, straight to her location. But they weren't the only ones closing in. Threx stood on the surface, watching the swarm move through the ruins with precision. "No more hiding," he said. "No more games." She saw them coming. Even with her blurred vision and broken limbs, she understood what was about to happen. This would be the end. There would be no more tricks, no more climbing, no more traps. Just the last stand of a fading body in a forgotten war. But then, something new entered the era, soft blue light scanning her from the sky. Then came footsteps, not heavy like the Alrex, lighter-human. She tried to turn her head, but her body didn't move. Then a shadow dropped beside her, and strong hands lifted her gently. She blinked hard and saw a familiar face. Raynor, eyes wide, voice shaking. "Still fighting?" he asked. She tried to speak, but only a dry breath escaped. He nodded anyway, holding her close as medics surrounded them and injected stabilizers into her arm. "You did it," he whispered. "They're afraid." Her eyes fluttered open for just a second. She saw the sky again. She saw a drone falling from above as one of her traps finally triggered. She heard a distant explosion. And then she smiled. She wasn't alone anymore. Raynor stood and turned to his team. "We hold this place. We defend her until extraction. We don't leave her behind." They took position in the ruins. As the sun rose, Alrexian forces approached. And for the first time since the war began, the defenders weren't hiding. They were ready. The Alrexian soldiers moved like a storm, waves of metal and muscle sweeping through the ruins with perfect timing. They had orders from General Threx himself: destroy everything, leave no survivors, erase the human from history. But this time, the ruins didn't belong to her alone. Raynor's team spread out across the broken city, setting traps, building cover, and planting explosives in the pathways she once crawled through. They knew her maps, her patterns, her methods. She hadn't just survived in the ruins. She had written the book on how to fight here. And now they were using her own lessons against the invaders. In the heart of the ruins, she lay on a makeshift medical bed. Her breathing was shallow, her body stitched and bruised, but her eyes remained open. A medic sat beside her, gently wiping dust from her face. "You did more than anyone thought possible," he said softly. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Outside, Raynor fired the first shot. A plasma bolt struck an Alrexian scout and lit the air with flame. His team followed, moving fast, hitting hard, then disappearing into smoke. For every human fighter, 5 Alrexians fell. They weren't just fighting back. They were making every second count. Threx watched from his command post, furious. "How are there more?" he shouted. "They're not more," his aide replied. "They're just human." He slammed his fist into the console. "Then break them." The Alrexians dropped heavy tanks into the zone, crushing ruins under metal claws. But the humans had already placed remote charges along the paths. The moment the lead tank crossed the old support beam, a deep explosion ripped through the ground, swallowing it whole. Raynor's voice came through the comms. "This is for the cities you burned." Another tank exploded. A sniper took down 3 officers in a row. A drone crashed into the wall, hacked mid-air by one of her old codes. The ruins became a battlefield of memory, every trap she once used, now used again, stronger with teamwork. She had built the fight. Now they carried it forward. She stirred once on the medbed, eyes flicking toward the open sky. The smoke parted just enough for her to see a second resistance ship arriving, dropping more soldiers. Her people had returned. In full, they were answering her message with fire dot in a final act of desperation. Threx himself descended to the battlefield. He marched through the ruins in golden armor, surrounded by his finest guards. "Bring her to me," he ordered. "Alive or dying, I want her eyes to see who wins." But when his squad reached the central square, it was empty, except for one voice behind him. "You came too late." He turned. There she stood, barely holding herself up. Bruised, half-wrapped in bandages, leaning on a steel pipe, but standing. Raynor's team had tried to stop her. The medics warned her body couldn't take more strain. But she had refused. She wanted to see the end. Threx raised his cannon. "You think this makes you brave?" She stepped forward. "No," she said. "It makes me human." Before he could fire, a hidden detonator in her hand blinked red. The buildings around them had been wired, an old plan she had built before the first squad ever arrived. With a press of her thumb, the walls came down in a thunderstorm of stone and flame. Raynor tackled her to the ground, shielding her with his armor as the sky turned white. When the smoke cleared, the golden armor lay broken. Threx was gone. The last general of the Alrexian front had fallen, and the humans still stood. Days later, the ruins were quiet again. But not empty. The resistance had built a forward base where her beacon had once stood. The tower was still broken, but its signal remained active, no longer a call for help. Now it was a call for unity. She sat beside it, wrapped in warm layers, with a cup of tea in her hand. Raynor sat next to her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Do they know?" Raynor looked at the sky. "They know now." And across the stars, every world free or enslaved heard the message again. One human had fought like a monster. Because the truth was, monsters can be broken. But a human who refuses to fall, that's what empires fear most.